Now it's being snow. So, hey, what's up, reefers? We had a little bit of IT issue problem here, but happy Tuesday to many of you. Going into fall, it's also the first of the changing your clocks back. So, hope everyone's getting used to that. But more importantly, today we have a great opportunity to talk to Modern Mermaid Reefer, also known as Jay, about what's going on in her reefing verse. And obviously, many of you may have seen her Instagram, seen her posts. But I wanted to invite her in today to talk a little bit about her perspective as being an up-and-coming reefer, being a student in the hobby, and what are some of the things that she's seeing, and more importantly, how she's navigating some of these passes. So welcome to the stream, and I'm curious to hear again some of your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. Like you said, I'm Modern Mermaid Reefer. My name is also Jay. I'm currently a marine biology major at University of California, Santa Barbara. So I have a problem. I couldn't not have a tank in college. I've been doing this for a long time, probably 8-9 years now. And they said I couldn't have a dog, so I decided to keep fish and corals.
And the dog taste puffer is okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe not in this reef, but maybe the second tank. They never said I had to have only one tank, but it's definitely a lot of fun. Keeping a tank in college is definitely really hard. This one I did bare bottom because I'm a total hypocrite because I hated on bare bottoms my entire life. I was like, sure. I could never do a bare bottom. Sand all the way, substrate. I need it. And then I hit college and I was like, get rid of it. No.
I totally understand. I'm a huge fan of bare bottom, but when I was at university, I did my marine biology in University of Hawaii, and being able to keep stuff that was native to Hawaii was always something fun, and to see how you collect it, in its local habitat. And obviously, being in Santa Barbara, California, you get access to a lot of temperate stuff not suitable for your aquarium behind you. But you can see the compare and contrast of, how temperature and nutrients play in both environments.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's totally crazy. I mean, I do a lot of scuba diving. So we've gone out to the Channel Islands, and I believe it's Santa Cruz Island that has a beautiful Gregorian forest. Obviously, that's NPS.
Sure.
But it's so crazy that here in California, that's pretty much all we can get. It's Gregorians all the way.
There's some black coral as well. That's not too far off the coast of Los Angeles for those of our international viewers. Yeah.
But of the pretty corals, Gregorian is as pretty as it gets. And I remember going to Hawaii and being like, oh my gosh, look at all these pretty corals, and being like, that's an expensive coral, but here it is just living in the wilds, which is always so cool. Which has got to be a really cool opportunity. Living in aquarium world is so different in college than it was back home, because I used to work at a local fish store. Mm-hmm. So I was constantly meeting people who were in the hobby. And then I come here and people are like, why would you do that? Why would you spend that much time on that? And I'm like, it's just a problem.
And so I obviously I see that there's the window behind you. Do people go by and wonder what's going on
in here all the time? They're like, we see you your dorm glowing from outside. So they'll come in and they come and see the tank. And so the popular fish is Nugget, my gold nugget clownfish. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves him because he's iconic. He's just got personality for days.
Of course.
So he's definitely the popular resident of the dorm hall.
Nice. And you also got a new hawkfish too recently.
I did. I got Tony Hawk, the hawkfish.
Tony Hawk.
He's a flame hawk. He's a baby, and Nugget gets a little mad at him sometimes. And I'm just waiting for the day that Tony Hawkfish realizes he can bite Nugget back. Once he realizes that, Nugget will stop picking on him.
Yep, fair enough. It probably won't take too long.
Yeah, no. But honestly, one of the coolest ways I've kept my macros alive here is using Aquaforce amino acids. That's just a personal thing for me. I mean, I guess everybody has their own thing, what makes things do better. And I use Aquaforce as amino acids, and my macros are so happy in here because of using them, because now that I don't have substrate, it's really hard to build up that nice nutrients and things like that. And I found that dosing the amino acids a little bit more than I used to, the macros are able to stay healthy, happy, growing, not dying and crashing the tank. So that's really cool about Aquaforce. I personally think amino acids make a big difference in the way macros grow.
Amino acids are definitely an important staple. It's something that a lot of folks, have their own opinions on, right? But it's a building block, as part of the proteins for things to grow. And we recently came out with a power elixir, so I'll make sure I get you out a bottle to that. And it is an amino acid super, food for the corals. And one of the things that we looked at when doing the testing for it is just how much corals actually absorb on a more consistent basis, amino acids. And they often get a bad rap because I think far too often in the hobby, people just like, oh, the more is better, the more is better. And that's not always the case. In many ways, less is more, because it's really just, taking these small little polyps, in their feeding discs or whatever you want to call, the LPS, SPS, but what they can absorb. So, the micro dosing of it is something that I think really goes a long way, that we overestimate just how our corals are absorbing nutrients. So maybe first, tell us a little bit about your tank. How big is it? What do you got in it? What lights are on it? We know it's in your dorm room. Let's start with that.
So this is a 30-gallon. It's a drop-off tank. I decided to go big or go home. I was allowed a 10-gallon in the student manual, and I said no.
It looks like 10 gallons to me.
Yeah, it's pretty much whenever the RA comes in, I'm like, that's 10 gallons. It's just because the glass is thick and the way it's shaped, it just comes off like it's bigger. And in there, like I said, I have my gold nugget, and then I got my flame hawkfish. I have this really pretty tooth coral. I've got this giant green Nephthia that isn't fully open yet, but it gets so huge all the time. And what's really cool about Nephtheas is they're functionally extinct, meaning they're extinct in the wild, but not in the hobby, which is so cool. And not cool that they're extinct in the wild, but it's cool to still have them alive. I've got a few, Rhodactis. I've got Zoas for days. And then I had a few torch corals, but unfortunately I went on vacation for 2 days, and that was too many days to be away from the tank, apparently. So my torches did not survive that, which was very unfortunate. But that's unfortunately just part of the hobby.
Sure.
And so right now that's what I got going. I'm probably going to go to the local fish store within the next 2 days to go restock.
Get a couple more.
Yeah. I can't not. And then I have a few Gregorians in there. Because why not?
So obviously, we talked about stuff not living in the wild, but in your tank. What are some of your thoughts about hobbyists or researchers and scientists being able to offer colonies back to the wild and being able to transplant them back into the ocean? Is that something that you guys are talking about in your classes or your own personal perspective on?
Yeah, so not really in classes, unfortunately, but I have worked closely with researchers who are doing those things, just from different organizations that I've worked with. And a lot of it coincides with genetic engineering and being able to understand and break down the genetic sequences of a lot of these corals and figure out how to make these corals more pH resistant and things like that. Because it's not so much soft corals that researchers and conservationists are trying to bring back to reefs. It's a lot of the SPS corals.
Yeah.
Because those Montiporas, Aquaporas, things like that, those are all the backbones of reefs. And those are the ones that are struggling the most.
With the acidification of the reefs, of course, and temperature increasing. Yeah.
Right. So right now, with what I've worked with, it's a lot of breaking down the sequence of these corals and figuring out how to implement more acidic resistant SPS corals to be able to go plant those into reefs and be able to help build those colonies back up. Because unfortunately, we can't just rely on the wild regrowth, because there won't be enough genetic diversity, and that will be detrimental to the corals in and of itself. So unfortunately, humans messed it up, so now humans have to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, there's one of the questions that have come up here about any fear of making a super coral that might take over. And obviously we talk about that in robotics, in different ways, can a robot take over, us? Do you guys ever have a chance to talk about that or think about that? Is it possible to create a super coral that would, destroy
that's
others?
a really great question. So that's also what's really cool about being able to keep tanks and things like that in like the research world. There's a lot of testing we do prior to planting them out in the wild.
Sure.
So we see how they interact with corals that they're going to naturally interact with in whatever reef we decide to plant them in. So we have different tanks for like Indonesia, different tanks for Australia, and the types of corals that coral that we're working on will be interacting with to prevent any issues of like one taking out the other and then it becoming a huge mess. In like theoretical terms, you could technically create like a super coral that, like, if you took Xenia and GPS or GSP and put them together, I'm sure you could do some damage.
Damage everywhere. Yeah.
I'm sure damage could be done. But like I said, we're not really working on soft corals. A lot of it is SPS, and SPS doesn't grow very fast normally. So it would be a lot easier to like nip it in the bud before it could become a problem.
Yeah, fair enough. It reminds me of thinking about that super predator. It's like the crown of thorns, starfish, right? And just how much, or urchins, local to us, are really just munching away on, whether it be the coralline of the urchins local, or the crown of thorns, just anything and everything in sight. Great Barrier Reef going through Indonesia, that indeed invasive species, have that potential to do so. And I think that it's great to hear that you guys are thinking about that and looking at the cause and effect of what's being done.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the weird things about the hobby is the hobby. Sometimes I've met people who it makes them respect corals less, and it makes them respect corals more. And I think that's just like that weird balance with the hobby. And a lot of times people are like, well, corals are so finicky, if they can't, survive in my tank, why have them in the wild? And it's super, super crucial that reefers who are, doing the hobby, I think, learn just through practice and trial and error that corals in and of themselves are not super finicky. I mean, they've survived both ice ages. I mean,
that's right. They're pretty resilient.
They're pretty resilient. And a lot of the times it's not really temperature that's causing the death of these corals. The temperature is what causes the acidification and such. The acidification is what's causing the problem.
Yeah, the amount of CO2.
Yeah, I mean, acid in anything doesn't really work out too well. So I think a lot of it is learning how, when you're having like your own little miniature ocean, it's a lot easier for things to go wrong than when you've got a giant ocean out there. It doesn't take a lot to go wrong in a tiny tank versus the ocean. So
but it's also this economies of scale, right? If you look at it, we measure the ORP, so we're looking at, what is, the amount of oxygen to CO2 in our tanks. The same thing, NOAA that determines what's the amount of CO2 in the air to the ocean. So, it's a scale issue. And I think that you're absolutely right, is that more people today, and I'll say, younger folks are much more in tune to that than I think a lot of the older generations, of reefers, of yesteryear. And so, I definitely, as I said at the beginning of this, I was keen to get your perspective on, what it's like being a reefer today and going through university and learning about it, both out of passion, but also out of, academics, and how you weave those together. And immediately, it's at a different place even when I was learning it, 15 years ago, of where things are at and how science and citizen researchers are working together.
Yeah, it is really cool to see researchers and citizens come together to try to create this common happiness in the ocean. And because it really wasn't like that, even just, 10, 15 years ago, unfortunately. And I think even working at like a local fish store, it's so evident to see that difference. And I think that like getting into the hobby for any like new reefers or anybody who's like thinking about joining the saltwater world, I think the problem sometimes can be there's a lot of different opinions, and a lot of people have very strong opinions, about how to do certain things in the saltwater world, my recommendation would always be take anything you read online with a grain of salt, because what works for one reefer might not work for you.
Yep, very true.
Like it's always an ongoing joke of like the vodka dosing into tanks. If you're a new reefer and you don't know what that is, it's quite literally you dose vodka into your tank to break down ammonia.
That's right. It's as a carbon food source to your bacteria.
Yeah. It's a very out of the box idea, but a lot of reefers love it. I can't lie. I've done it a couple of times. I can't lie. It works. But I definitely would not jump headfirst into that. Like a lot of reefers I know would be like, always do it. You should do it all the time.
Sure.
I would be very careful about putting vodka into your tank. But I think that's a really great example of just the random like ideas people have that are like, this is the perfect way to do it, so do it this way. But you'll get another reefer who's like, that's the stupidest way to do it, so you have to do it my way. And I think that can get super confusing.
There's absolutely so many different ways of keeping a tank successful, and I think that's what helps the hobby to continue to grow. Is people try things. You may have you're in one of our group chats, so I talked about my vinegar-based dosing and how vinegar is an acid and what I'm using instead of CO2, right?
Yeah.
So but it's how we progress the science and the hobby together. And I think that there's still a lot of room for experimentation here, which is fantastic. And
I think a lot of the hobby experimentation really aids researchers, because researchers pay attention to what's going on in the hobby, believe it or not. Like half the time, like interns and things like that, volunteers, which as a youngling, that's what I end up being. Good old researchers will be like, I need you to spend the next 2 hours on all these reef forums and document what people are doing right now. And I'm like, yay, sounds fun.
I mean, that's actually quite interesting, because I don't know if that's ever being discussed. Like, I don't know if on the forums, Reef to Reef, Reef Central, or any of the other ones, people would take into account, or the Facebook groups, that a researcher is passively or actively listening and gathering information from it. And I think that that's cool to hear. And at the same time, it would be great, to be able to help them more actively. So, I'll say, the Aquaforest Facebook group, I'll speak on behalf of the collective. If you guys need something or you're doing research, please join the group, ask a question, and we'll do our best to help you guys out to make it a little bit easier for you there.
Definitely. Yeah, that would probably make my life a little easier, because I love just going through like Reef to Reef or like Reef Central and be like, CO2, and then like going through all of those. But
yeah, if you got questions on that, by all means, ask away.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely something researchers do. It's definitely something researchers make their interns do.
Yeah.
And it is super, super beneficial, because every once in a while we stumble upon like these random little like golden nuggets, and we're like, oh, this is what we needed. This is exactly what we needed. And then we'll take it, and then we'll be like, look what we found. Now we should experiment with this. And it's really crucial. So if you guys are ever like having questions, please post them online. Let people do the little arguing that they like to do in the comments usually. Let the argument happen, because us researchers are loving it. We do eat popcorn sometimes. Like we'll be sitting there, we're like, wow, there's a lot of hostility in that comment. But there is a lot of valuable information that comes from people commenting on different questions and things like that.
That's great to hear. And I just want to say hello to everyone who's recently joined on either the Facebook group or on YouTube. Thank you for your comments. Definitely appreciate it. Gallery Aquatica, thanks for joining. And I think you're absolutely right that pH is such an underrepresented, under-talked about, underrated parameter. And I think it's only now just starting to come back to the surface as being something that people are talking about again. And it's great. And I hope that more conversations can happen, so teams like Jay and others are able to start to use these conversations to help inform other research and just discuss it. And just maybe harping on the pH thing for a second, I think so many people just don't really understand what pH is, right? They don't understand that it's a hydrogen or hydronium ions that are tied to that, and how they may anecdotally know when the light is on, your pH is higher, but the science behind that is that when photosynthesis is happening, those ions are moving differently. The hydrogen turns into hydronium, which is allowing your pH to change. And when you change that, or you change your lights, right, more blue to less white, all of that has direct correlations to the pH or potential hydrogen value. And I think we don't spend enough time talking about that, really documenting and learning like the cause and effects of what it is. We just think about, is it acidic or basic? And I think that that's fundamentally just an oversimplification of the extent of what that complex parameter is representing. So I gather quite a great point. And Jay, I know you would agree with that as well.
Yeah, 100%. There's no doubt about it. Even when I was working at the local fish store, people would come in and they're like, why is my pH so low all of a sudden? I'm like, well, when did you test it? And they're like, why does that matter? And I'm like, well, were the lights on? Where are they off? Was it night? All of that plays such a key factor in it. And 100%, it is not talked about enough. And I think it is such a crucial factor for like keeping tanks alive that I'm surprised it doesn't get talked about more. I think it's super easy to mess it up. And I think because so many different corals have so many different happy places when it comes to the pH scale, I'm truly surprised it doesn't get talked about more, because it is a pretty common reason why certain corals don't do well in a lot of different reefers' tanks.
Yeah, I think for a long time people were just accepted the fact that 7.9 to 8.1 was acceptable, right? And I think that we just became complacent with that as a value. But I've been a long time supporter of metal halides, where it was okay, and you got an 8.5, like it happened.
Yeah.
Right. And you look at the intensity, and I know people can argue a watt is a watt, but I may put it up there for discussion that a watt of LED is slightly different than a watt from a metal halide, and maybe the functional output may be similar, but the way corals are using that watt, maybe I think is a little bit different. And I know that there is some research out there testing these things, and I'm definitely excited to see what that comes back with. But as light technology changes and evolves, I think so too does our understanding of what these parameters are actually doing in our tanks, and that ideal target of 8.2 should be something we look at day and night, not have it drop to 8.1, 8, whatever in the evening. But I think that's why we're talking about CO2 scrubbers. We're talking about recirculating scrubbers. All of these things, I think, are in this quest to try to reach that higher, pH point.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, parameters are always a tricky thing. I mean, any new reefer, if there's a new reefer watching this or anything like that, unfortunately, getting used to parameters, getting used to how your tank is going to handle parameters is a very individualistic experience.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of things online saying it's going to be this way. If you do X, Y, and Z, you'll never struggle.
Yeah.
You very easily could do X, Y, and Z and still struggle. What we like to say in marine bio world is nothing in marine bio world is a race. It's a marathon. You just gotta stick through it. Every once in a while, you gotta like take a step back, drink some water, and be like, "This is my break," and then you gotta get back to the marathon. So if you're willing to like sit through the marathon, accept that sometimes things don't work out the way you want it to.
Yes.
It'll be okay. I mean, I've been doing this for 8-9 years, and things still don't work out the way I want them to sometimes. I go on vacation for 2 days, and my torches all die. So it's kind of annoying. But I mean, I've gone on vacation for 3 weeks, and my entire tank is happy as a clam. No pun intended.
Yeah, I think there's just so much that we don't know, right? And you talked about the vodka dosing earlier. We are finally only scratching the surface about the complete biome of our aquariums, and we for the longest time did not spend the time and effort understanding what's the bacteria balance at our tank. Are we overdoing something? We may say, oh, there's a bacteria bloom. I get the white film on the tank, and therefore I've got too much of something. Let me add a UV, so it's like cause effect, but without understanding like, okay, what's the ideal bacteria balance? Can I dose something to help get back to an equilibrium within my ecology, right? So again, thinking to some of the science there, the ecology of it, I think will get us to be more informed. And I have to say, a lot of up and coming reefers today are really taking a much more holistic approach to reef keeping than I think some of the salty reefers are, which are a little set in their ways, and all it be is fine. But having that little bit wider aperture to see the things differently is I think really changing the way that we look at how our tanks are being kept.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that goes all the way, down to just how we see, climate change and things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
newer generations, a little bit more holistic than other generations. And we already see that helping, which is absolutely amazing. And we're all really excited about that now
Sure.
people are finally like taking a step back and being like, let's fix these problems. And I know researchers are just absolutely thrilled over that. And we're seeing a lot of new people entering the hobby. And even in just the freshwater world, I mean, when you start paying attention to the ecology of just freshwater in and of itself, you're still gaining that respect for parameters, which is going to thus instill that sense of like stewardship later on.
Yes.
So I think it's great.
And out of curiosity, are you finding that more and more students or more people are getting into the sciences and into marine biology program, as you go, year after year? Have you noticed that as well, that folks are, either being drawn to the marine biology as an example because of things like climate change, that they want to take a more proactive role?
I think that's a hard question, because I think people are in general more inclined to want to help fix climate change, but I don't think a lot of people see it as a career path, just because I think there is still that like social stigma of, if I do marine biology or ecology, I will fail in life because I'll never make money because I'll be working off grants for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's sadly, I get it.
It's not false.
It is not false. It's not.
And I think that's still a huge deterrent just from a societal standpoint. So I think people want to help, but they don't necessarily always see it as a career choice just because.
Yeah. And I think that's something that those in the hobby, I think it's important to show folks that is a career path, right? So, for those, that may not be aware, like Aquaforest has a couple biotechnologists, there's a bioengineer, chemist, marine biologist on staff, and all of those helped in the creation of the Aquaforest products. And I'm sure other brands have some of that. I'm not sure they have all of that. But to be able to let students know, like, that's a viable path. Like, you can work for someone in the industry, and do R&D within a company, a brand. And I don't know that that's communicated as much, and I don't know if researchers, professors see that as a viable path to share. And so if I could bestow one thing onto you coming out of these conversations, is to disseminate that to other marine biologists, students, is that like there's a path in something that will make money outside of grants.
Right. Yeah. We don't have to live off grants for the rest of our life.
Exactly. Yeah. Real quick, there's a question in the chat asking about scrubbing and microbubbling in the evening. So I have a perspective on that, but curious, in your labs, is that something that you guys ever use, both for rising the pH and for cleaning of the water?
It very much depends on the system we're using. So we have a lot of different ocean systems. Depending on what is inside that system will depend on whether or not like we do the microbubbles and things like that. The labs that I've worked with are big fans of scrubbing, like big fans of it. And I personally don't do it just because my tank is so small, and I just don't. I'm a bad reefer. I know. I'm sorry, but I end up doing it so much at the research labs I get back, and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. But I also really like microbubbles. I had in my big tank back at home for a while when I had a predator tank. Loved microbubbles. Microbubbles were perfect. So I think it's great to do research on it. And I think depending on your system, you can pick which one might suit you best. But I definitely think it's something reefers should look into all the time, because it does help. And at research labs, depending on what is in our system, we will choose whether or not to scrub with microbubbles, not pick microbubbles, not scrubbing, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to it. And one of the things that so I've done it in two different ways. I've both done it in my main display tank, and while I noticed the clarity of it as it pulls out stuff, I also noticed that many of my sticks don't particularly like it. They get a lot of the slime coating on it. And while I think that they can adjust to it, is that a reoccurring stress that I like to give them?
Right.
I go back and forth. So I found it actually much more effective for water clarity, okay, to do it in the sump. And so I will create a partition in the sump, or I'll raise my baffling, and I will microbubble the heck out of my sump, getting the same effect, right? And having all those microbubbles pull out stuff and go through a foam layer. So by the time it goes through the return pump back into the tank, very little bubbles. And therefore I don't get the same slime coating and irritation on my sticks, but I've achieved the goal, right? Comes back to what is your goal in the cleanliness of the water, being able to pull off some of those things. So I think it's a great question in terms of, does it help to maintain and stabilize pH? Honestly, I think that by creating your air stone, you're actually adding more CO2 into the water, not reducing. So pH stability, I would actually say that you're probably going to lower your pH, but from a water clarity perspective, you will achieve it. If it possible, I think you'll see better results if you do it in your sump at a more micro to the macro bubbles in the sump. I think you'll get a better result out of it, personally.
And I would love to add on top of that, if you're looking at that for pH and things like that, like Aaron said, it's probably not going to help your pH. It's going to probably lower it a bit. But also remember, like with water clarity, it depends on what is inside your tank. Not all corals want really clean water. Yeah. And I think that's some information that gets kind of like confused a lot, where people are like, I must have pristine water quality all the time to have successful corals. I kept high nutrient corals for most of my years of reefing because I'm lazy. And sometimes I like knowing that my tank can get high in its, phosphates and be okay. So take like water clarity with a grain of salt. Research what type of corals you have or want to have, and then kind of work around that, see how much, micro bubbles you want in your sump and things like that, how often you want to do that. Because that may harm whatever it is you have in your tank. Like my macros, I could never put micro bubbles in my tank for like my macros, because it would totally kill my macros. Sure. And they would crash my tank. So I think know what's inside your tank first.
I think you bring up a great point, Jay. It's about understanding like what is your goal and what do you have, right? And what do you want to have? And I think if you come back to that as the fundamentals, you will then start to adopt approaches and methods and methodologies that will complement what it is that you want to keep in your tank and what will do well your tank, case in point, right? You know what's in there, you know what it needs to thrive, and you offer it those elements. Like for example, if you had low nutrients in there, your macro wasn't going to do well either, right? So you've found an equilibrium, a balance in there of what the nutrients are good for your macro as well as your corals.
Yeah.
And your schedule, of course, too.
Yeah, of course, it does have to fit into the college schedule.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm speaking of college schedule, I want to be very mindful of your time. Thank you for being so generous today between your exams and studying. Anything else that you wanted to share with us today? I see a lot of comments. Folks are definitely appreciating you being here and being able to share your perspective. Would love to have you on again, but in the couple minutes that we have with you left, anything that you would like to share with us about something you're working on or something that you want to see changed or done differently?
Sure. Well, right now, personally, I'm working on shark conservation. That is my main focus right now. Sharks are my favorite thing in the entire world. And right now we're working on mako shark conservation.
Very cool.
Because mako sharks live here off of our coast of California. Mm-hmm. They're really cool. They're known for breaching out of the water. They can jump like 15 feet in the air. Like, it's crazy. And unfortunately, California doesn't have any legislative that prevents mako sharks from being fished and finned and things like that, because even though federally finning is illegal, state-wise it is still legal in a lot of states, and California is one of those states. So right now we're working on pushing legislative for banning finning of mako sharks, as they are endangered sharks at this point, and they are super crucial to maintaining our ecosystem here off the coast of California. So right now, that's what I'm working on. Lots and lots of research papers on that right now.
Oh, that's really cool. And I didn't know that the California allowed finning here, and I was under the assumption that it was nationwide, that it was banned. So
nationwide it is. Statewide,
yeah, I didn't realize that there was a discrepancy there.
Yeah, it's just like the marijuana laws. It's federally illegal, statewise not so much.
I understand. Well, I hope that we can have you back and you can share a little bit more with us some of the work that you're doing with the mako sharks, and where you see that program taking hold.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So again, thank you guys for joining the discussion today. And for those of you who asked questions, I think they were great questions. If you have any more thoughts, comments, please put them in the comments below. If you're not following the Aquaforest channel, please hit that subscribe button. And those of you in the Facebook group have other questions, by all means, let us know. And hopefully we can have Jay come back soon and be able to offer some additional thoughts and comments and perspectives. Yeah. So for now, Jay, thank you for your time. Reefers,
thank you.
Stay safe.